Whilomville Stories Part 9, The Stove, Stephen Crane Short Stories. "They'll bring her," said Mrs. Trescott dubiously. Her cousin, the painter, the bewildered father of the angel child, had written to say that, if they were asked, he and his wife would come to the Trescotts for the Christmas holidays, but he had not officially stated that the angel child would form part of the expedition. "But of course they'll bring her," said Mrs. Trescott to her husband. The doctor assented. "Yes, they'll have to bring her. They wouldn't dare leave New York at her mercy." "Well," sighed Mrs. Trescott after a pause, "the neighbours will be pleased. When they see her, they'll immediately lock up their children for safety." "Anyhow," said Trescott, "the devastation of the Margate twins was complete. She can't do that particular thing again, and she'll be interested to note what form of her energy will take this time." "Oh, yes, that's it," cried the wife. "You'll be interested. You've hit it exactly. You'll be interested to know what form her energy will take this time. And then, when the real crisis comes, you'll put on your hat and walk at the house and leave me to straighten things out. This is not a scientific question. This is a practical matter." "Well, as a practical man, I advocate chaining her out in the stable," answered the doctor. When Jimmy Trescott was told that his old flame was again to appear, he remained calm. In fact, time had mended his youthful heart, and it was a regular apple of oblivion and peace. Her image in his thought was as the track of a bird on deep snow. It was an impression, but it did not concern the depths. However, he did what befitted his state. He went out and bragged in the street. "My cousin is coming next week from the New York. My cousin is coming tomorrow from New York." "Girl or boy?" said the populace bluntly, but when enlightened they speedily cried, "Oh, we remember her." They were charmed, for they thought of her as an outlaw, and they surmised that she could lend them into an very ecstasy of sin. Thought of her as a brave bandit, because they had been whipped for various pranks into which she had led them. When Jimmy made his declaration, they fell into a state of pleased and shuddering expectancy. Mrs. Trescott pronounced her point of view. "The child is a nice child, if only Caroline had some sense, but she hasn't, and Willis is like a wax figure. I don't see what can be done unless you simply go to Willis and put the whole thing right at him." Then, for the purpose of indication, she improvised a suite. "Look here, Willis, you've got a little daughter, haven't you? But confound it, man, she is not the only girl child ever brought into the sunlight. There are a lot of children. Children are an ordinary phenomenon. In China they drown girl babies. If you wish to submit to this frightful impostor and tyrant, that is all very well, but why in the name of humanity do you make us submit to it?" Dr. Trescott laughed. "I wouldn't dare say it to him." "Anyhow," said Mrs. Trescott determinedly, that is what you should say to him. It wouldn't do the slightest good. It would only make him very angry, and I would lay myself perfectly open to a suggestion that I had better attend to my own affairs with more rigour." "Well, I suppose you are right," Mrs. Trescott again said. "Why don't you speak to Caroline?" asked the doctor humorously. "Speak to Caroline? Why, I wouldn't for the world. She'd fly through the roof. She'd snap my head off. Speak to Caroline? You must be mad." One afternoon the doctor went to await his visitors on the platform of the railway station. He was thoughtfully smiling. For some quaint reason he was convinced that he was to be treated to a quick manifestation of little Cora's peculiar and interesting powers. And yet, when the train paused at the station, there appeared to him only a pretty little girl in a fur-lined hood, and with her nose reddening from the sudden cold, and attended respectfully by her parents. He smiled again, reflecting that he had comically exaggerated the dangers of dear little Cora. It amused his philosophy to note that he had really been perturbed. As the big sleigh sped homeward, there was a sudden shrill outcry from the angel child. "Oh, mamma, mamma, they've forgotten my stove." "Hush, dear, hush," said the mother. "It's all right." "Oh, but mamma, they've forgotten my stove." The doctor thrust his chin suddenly out of his top coat collar. "Stove?" he said. "Stove? What stove?" "Oh, just a toy of the child's," explained the mother. "She's grown so fond of it, she loves it so, that if we didn't take it everywhere with her, she'd suffer dreadfully, so we always bring it." "Oh," said the doctor. He pictured a little tin trinket, but when the stove was really unmasked, it turned out to be an affair of cast iron, as big as the portmanteau, and, as the stage people say, practicable. There was some trouble that evening when came the hour of children's bedtime. Little Cora burst into a wild declaration that she could not retire for the night unless the stove was carried upstairs and placed at her bedside. While the mother was trying to dissuade the child, the Trescotts held their peace and gazed with awe. The incident closed when the lamb-eyed father gathered the stove in his arms and preceded the angel child to her chamber. In the morning, Trescott was standing with his back to the dining-room fire, awaiting breakfast, when he heard a noise of descending guests. Presently the door opened and the party entered in regular order. First came the angel child, then the cooing mother, and the last the great painter with his arms full of the stove. He deposited it gently in a corner and sighed. Trescott wore a wide grin. "What are you carting that thing all over the house for?" he said brutally. "Why don't you put it in some place where she can play with it and leave it there?" The mother rebuked him with a look. "Well, if it gives her pleasure, Ned," she expostulated softly. "If it makes the child happy to have a stove with her, why shouldn't she have it?" "Just so," said the doctor with calmness. Jimmy's idea was the roaring fireplace in the cabin of the lone mountaineer. At first he was not able to admire a girl's stove built on well-known domestic lines. He eyed it and thought it was very pretty, but it did not move him immediately. But a certain respect grew to an interest, and he became the angel child's accomplice. And even if he had not had an interest grow upon him, he was certain to have been implicated sooner or later. Because of the imperious ways of little Cora, who made a serf of him in a few swift sentences, together they carried the stove out into the desolate garden and squatted it in the snow. Jimmy's snug little muscles had been pitted against the sheer nervous vigour of this little golden-haired girl, and he had not won great honours when the mind blazed. Inside the small body the angel child was pure force. She began to speak. "Now, Jim, get some paper, get some wood, little sticks at first. Now we want a match. You got a match? Well, go get a match. Get some more wood, hurry up now. No, I'll light it my own self. You get some more wood. There, isn't that splendid? You get a whole lot of wood and pile it up here by the stove. And now what'll we cook? We must have something to cook, you know, else it ain't like the real." "Potatoes," said Jimmy at once. The day was clear, cold, bright, and icy, widespread from over the waters of the lake. A grown person would hardly have been abroad save on compulsion of a kind, and yet when they were called to luncheon, the two little simpletons protested with great cries.